everyone, Victoria started again on ITV on Sunday night and I'll be commenting on each week. So the first episode was called The Soldier's Daughter, and the main issue here was about whether Victoria should go back to work so soon with the First Anglo-Afghan War, also known as the disaster in Afghanistan, also going on. Was Albert being sexist or just a loving, protective husband? But firstly, what were the Brits doing in Afghanistan 176 years ago? Well, it was nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, it was about India. Basically, the Russians had previously said they wanted to take over India, which was known as the jewel in the British Empire. And Afghanistan is between Russia and India. And India is a very nice place and very valuable. Interestingly, though, it was the Whigs, in particular Lord Melbourne, lovely Rufus Sewell from the last series, and Lord Palmerston, who wanted British troops in Afghanistan, and they are the forerunners of the Liberal Party. It's actually the Tories of Sir Robert Peel, the current Prime Minister in this episode, who are questioning why the Brits were sent there at all. No, it's the other way around to the Democrats and Republicans in America. Well, as we saw in this episode, this resulted in the disaster of 4,000 British troops being annihilated at Gadamak. Was Albert being sexist in keeping key military information from Victoria and insisting she rest up? Let's look at the key reasons from Victoria and Albert's perspectives. For Victoria, we could see that she just wanted to get back to work and rule her nation. Back in 1841, it was really weird for a woman to be in power, and Victoria was actually barred by Salic law from inheriting Hanover, unlike the rest of the Hanoverian British monarchs, since 1714, because she was a woman. And we saw from how Victoria's uncle and father treated her, and poor baby Princess Victoria, she was expected to bear sons, with Albert taking on her monarchical duties. This would mean that Victoria would be possibly insecure about her position and want to insist even more about performing her duties to hold on to her power. Secondly, as we've seen in Victoria's pride of her country and army, she has a very strong sense of civic duty. Given the disaster in Afghanistan, she very much feels it is her job to be there for her people as a sign of positivity and hope. Thirdly, it was hinted in the episode, and some historians have posited, that Victoria may have suffered from postnatal depression after many of her pregnancies. We saw Victoria ask her outgoing lady when she started liking her child, and sometimes she did look a bit awkward about being given her child to hold. That may have been another reason why she wanted to get back to work. As for Albert, he did withhold key military information from his wife because he didn't want to upset her. Was that him being a considerate husband or overprotective? I think in this case, upsetting as the news was, Victoria's still the monarch and she needs to know about these matters, and Albert should give her more credit. However, he does know now for next time, and there are 8 more children to come. Secondly, the doctor said Victoria needed to rest for at least a month, according to Albert. And remember, there were no epidurals or prenatal modern medicines back in 1841, so even natural childbirth and the recovery afterwards would have been harder to deal with than it is nowadays. Was Albert right to insist that Victoria listen to the doctor? I think Albert was genuinely concerned for his wife's well-being and would naturally take the advice of a medical professional, as I'm sure many of us would do too. However, is the doctor part of an inherently patriarchal society? We saw how Victoria's father and uncle, Leopold, thought it such a shame that baby Victoria was a girl, not a boy, and they wanted a grandson by Christmas. So is Albert showing some perhaps unconscious bias in his treatment of Victoria? I think every couple has their problems, and now they've had their first child, Victoria and Albert have learnt more about how to handle the balance of power in their relationship, especially difficult given that Victoria is Albert's sovereign queen. It was lovely to see that they've made up by the end of the episode in what is probably the conception of baby Albert Edward, who later becomes Edward VII. There's barely a year between Victoria's first 2 children, so that timing would make sense. So next week, let's see how Victoria and Albert's relationship progresses, particularly as we've seen this week that Albert is rather chummy with Tory PM Sir Robert Peel, and they want to reform the army, whereas Victoria kind of feels the opposite and is happy to promote the brother of her Liberal Whig friend, Lord Alfred. That's it for me for now. See you next week.